I am Zarin, and tonight I'm reading you Horrors of Warcraft, Love's Baptism of Fire, written by Jezebel 1669. Love swung her new mace experimentally. The shiny metal head gleamed where she had been polishing it, and as she walked around to the orchards, her fingers traced over the delicately engraved patterning. She wondered for a moment if the 10-minute tutorial Deputy Willem had given her would be enough to face the kobold gathered ahead. Surely it must be. They wouldn't have sent her out to face them if they didn't think she could handle herself. That's some foreshadowing there. Suddenly, her daydream was interrupted as the sunlight dimmed. Looking up from her weapon, Love realized she'd walked straight into the orchard, well in her daze, and now the soft sunlight was tinted green by the overhanging leaves. All around, she could hear the high-pitched chattering of the vile little creatures she'd been sent to dispatch, but she couldn't see a single one of them. As she walked slowly, almost tiptoeing between the trees, the young priestess scanned between the foliage ahead, trying to spot the nasty little demons before they spotted her. Concentrating so hard on the distant shadows as she stepped around the bough of the closest tree, she practically walked straight into the first kobold she'd ever seen. The vaguely rat-like creature barely stood as high as her waist, and a guttering candle was practically melted onto the top of its head. Luckily it was facing away from her, fiddling with the bindings of his primitive hammer. Bracing herself, Love swung her mace up with both hands, her fingers locked together just as Willem had shown her on another long piece of wood a few days before. It's probably not what I was thinking it was, but still made me laugh. He'd warned her to keep a gentle but firm grip until He'd warned her to keep a gentle but firm grip and to let the length of the shaft slip easily between her fingers. She still didn't understand why he couldn't have just given her the mace to practice with, but rules were rules, and she certainly enjoyed cleaning the training tool once they were done. She could still taste the unique flavor in her mouth. Oh, I guess it was what I was thinking it was. Okay. Maybe she could ask Willem for a refresher course after she was done here. Unfortunately, her daydreaming got the better of her once again. The mace caught on the overhead branch without her noticing, and as she swung her arms down toward the kobold, the lightly gripped handle slipped right through her fingers. Expecting to be swinging a heavy weight downwards and suddenly overbalanced Love tripped forwards, falling heavily on top of the foul rat demon, her body forcing the poor thing down into the mulch. Fuck, that's a long sentence. As her mace dropped down onto her back, pushing her bum down against the large creature's tail. The thin material of her neophyte's robe was no protection from her fall, and already it had ripped open in several places. Most inconveniently was the tear down the front where the dress had caught on the kobold's pack of tools. Love felt the blush spreading over her face, like the sun rising over the fields. Although she could stand up quite easily, if she did, her robe would be shredded by the hooks and nails latching it to the pack, and that would leave her bosom exposed. As she lay on top of the struggling beast, its tail whipping between her legs, distracting her train of thought every time it pushed up against her crotch, Love tried to think of a way out of the situation. She couldn't unhook herself. If she tried to move her arms, the kobold would escape, and with its hammer waiting on the ground nearby, it would easily get the upper hand in a fight with the inexperienced neophyte. On the other hand, if she called for help, it would certainly alert the rat demon's cohorts to her presence, and they were much closer to respond than the guard back in the abbey. Another problem was her mace. Resting where it was, pinned her hips down against the kobold's bum and against his dashing tail. Each time the beast jiggled, the mace slid a little further between her legs, and with her butt sticking up in such an undignified manner, its flanges were already putting pressure on her most sensitive region. As Love tried to shift into a less distracting pose, she became aware that her options had just become a lot more limited. All around her, beady eyes were watching her struggling. Ooh. Starting to get saucy. The mace began to rub a lot more insistently against her crotch, and Love gave a slight yelp at the sensation. Tilting her head around, she saw one of the kobolds trying to pick up the heavy weapon. Its scrawny limbs weren't up to the task, though. and each time it managed to grip the handle, the weight of the mace would pull it from his hands, bumping directly against the young priestess's sex. Already she could feel the shameful juices beginning to stain her fresh robes. The surrounding kobolds seemed to be aware of her arousal too, their vermin noses sniffing at the air and their chittering chatter picking up pace and becoming more insistent. Several of them stepped closer to the one standing behind Love, still struggling with her mace. Together they gripped the heavy weapon and, as one, pulled it away from between her legs, their strained groans of effort accompanied by the telltale whisper of ripping material. A soft breeze brushed over her bare buttocks, and Love's blush got all the worse now that the beast could see that she had decided to forego any undergarments. Since she had been exposed so completely, the problem of her bosom seemed moot at this point. Bracing her hands against the gently decaying leaves, she tensed her arms, ready to push herself clear of the trapped kobold. But as she tried to flex her limbs and get away from the foul beast, she suddenly felt a weight drop onto her back. As she tried to look around, she saw two of the kobolds sitting on top of her, pinning her in place as the others all moved closer. As she glanced around the rapidly shrinking circle of rat demons, Love saw the large foul eyes swelling between their legs as their whiskered snouts sniffed her scent out of the air. Already the kiss of the cool air against her exposed buttocks was making her virgin slit water, the breeze puckering at her lips like a gentle lover. The neophyte felt something pressing against the back of her head, and as she twisted her neck to check what was happening, she got an extreme close-up of the kobold's cock as it grasped its shaft in its claw-like hand, the throbbing head thrusting right into her face and smearing stinky pre-cum all over her porcelain cheek. She tried to turn her head, pulling away from the foul cockhead, but the kobold's other hand had already worked its way into her hair, grasping tightly and holding her head in place as the beast rubbed itself against her face. Behind her, a fight was breaking out. Several of the kobolds were tangled together, all trying to be the first to fill the sweet meat with their pricks. As the couple broke away, swinging their hammers at each other, a third stepped up between the helpless priestess's legs. A couple more of its compatriots pulling them apart to give it room. Drawing up close, the foul creature stroked the tip of its stiff cock between the folds of Love's swollen and dripping sex. It opened its mouth, making a strange hissing purr of contentment at the pleasant sensation that her silken flesh caused in his sensitive tip, before gripping her hips with both hands and thrusting himself into her. Love cried out loudly, her mouth falling open with surprise at the sudden intrusion. It was all the kobold on her back needed, and as he gripped her head with both hands, he thrust his own hips forward, slamming his prick into her mouth until it bulged beneath her cheek. Gagging with disgust, Love tried to pull her head away, but with her hair caught in the beast's grasp, there was nothing she could do but stroke her head again along its length, something the kobold seemed to be enjoying immensely. The second beast on her back seemed to be getting the idea from its friends, and Love could feel its claws digging into her butt, squashing her buttocks together around its cock as the kobold in her pussy thrust forward again and again, forcing her body to rock forwards. The force was lifting her butt with each stroke, rubbing her cheeks over the other kobold's shaft and making it hiss with joy as well. The beast gripping her head suddenly started to squeeze her skull tightly, and for a moment Love thought it was deliberately trying to twist her head around until her neck snapped, but then its cock spasmed in her mouth and a foul-tasting goo shot straight down into her throat. That doesn't seem like a right angle for that, but nothing like the pleasingly salty flavor of Willem's deposit, but instead a bitter, earthy taste, and as the kobold fell backwards into the mulch and its prick popped from her mouth, Love coughed and spat, trying to expel the beast's cum. As though the sight of the choking holy woman was too much for him, the rat demon between her legs gripped his hips tighter, its claws biting into her flawless flesh as it too shot its load, filling her vagina for the first time with sticky ooze. Love blushed, and a feeling of shame rushed through her head as she felt her pussy responding to the stimulation automatically, clamping down on the cock as a wave of pleasure filled up her spine. She fought against it, refusing to have her first sexual peek be at the paws of such a foul creature. Moments later, a hot splatter hit her thighs as the third kobold came, its stream shooting between her arse cheeks and down her legs, slamming into its comrade as he pulled his shrinking prick from her cushioned cunt. For a second, Love thought she'd be given an opportunity to escape. As soon as the beast dismounted her, she'd be free to jump to her feet. Any thought of preserving the remains of her robe completely forgotten in the debauched perversion she'd been made to endure. No such opportunity came, though, as several of the rat demons moved in close, one jumping onto her shoulders as another couple pulled on her arms, forcing her hands around their cocks as they began to use them to masturbate with. The beast on her back grabbed her hair in its paws, but rather than forcing her to turn her head to face its prick, instead it wrapped her golden locks around its shaft, stroking the soft locks over the tight, knobbled skin. Between her legs, another kobold stepped up, quickly ramming its shaft into her gaping cunt as its predecessor's jizz dripped out onto the orchard floor. Finally, one last kobold climbed up on her arse, this time face down, with its cockhead sliding along the semen left moments before as it trickled down her crack. Bumping along the fold, the head tapped downwards against the rapidly bruising skin. It suddenly stopped as it found the puckered hole the beast had previously been working its way towards. Love wanted to cry out in dismay, to protest and call for the beast to stop, but she was still breathlessly gasping and coughing from the sickly taste in her throat. As her body was pushed forwards by the kobold thrusting into her cunt, its companion held its cockhead against her anus, the cum making the bulging ball slip slightly before the return stroke pulled the priestess back against it. Love let out a gurgling cry as her shithole was penetrated, the sticky jizz not nearly enough to cushion the force of the large member ramming its way into a virgin entry. The last of the cum spilled out of her mouth, dribbling down her chin as the horde of rat demons used her body as their personal sex toy. Love was glad they were all too busy or too tired to find her moaning mouth appealing. The pounding of her holes was making it more and more difficult for Love to fight the building pressure, the insistent thrusting rocking through her body, and the feel of the shafts between her fingers as the pre-cum dripped over her fingers was beginning to drive her wild with lust. Part of her brain, which she'd managed to suppress for years, was beginning to awaken, and the primitive drives of her body were sneaking into her conscious mind, insinuating deep and dark lusts into her thoughts. Without even realizing what was happening, Love found she was moving along with the foul creature's motions, her hips grinding against their cocks, her hands stoking along their pricks, and her head rolling, pulling her hair along the rider's dick. Suddenly, her gaping mouth, complete with the trail of kobold cream leaking over her chin, seemed far too empty. Instead of thanking her luck for the rat demons having forgotten about it, she was cursing them for not filling her body completely. Rolling her tongue over her lips, she scooped as much cum as she could into her mouth, swallowing it gladly and with relish. Where did she get relish from? Maybe there's a picnic nearby. It was all too much for the poor beasties. Faced with the brazenly wanton motions of the young neophytes' awakened lusts, they popped their load one by one. Streams of sticky white goodness shot up her arms, into her already stuffed cunt, into her virgin anus, and over her hair to drip down her face. Exhausted, the kobold collapsed around her, their cocks slipping out of her grasp as they fell onto the leaf mulch. Love lay there on top of the only... She's still on the kobold, oh my god. Love lay there on top of the only kobold in the entire orchard who'd not gotten the chance to fuck her prime and tender body, her breast pressing his face into the dirt as she panted for breath after the mind-blowing orgasm she'd just experienced. As she came to her senses, Love realized the kobold were all incapacitated, sleeping after being drained so thoroughly by her voracious sexual appetite. As she reached for her mace, the remnants of her robes ripped away heedlessly as she stood around, glancing around the crowded clearing. Started with the creature who'd got her into this mess, Love carefully and methodically moved from kobold to kobold, and with a clean and precise blow, stove in their heads one by one. Once she was sure every last one was dead, she went about stripping their corpses of anything valuable. By divine providence, the beasts were carrying between them enough pieces of armor to make up a full set, and stripping off the last few tattered scraps of her pure white robes, which were now nothing more than cum-soaked rags, she donned her new outfit. Taking a moment to savor the feel of the dyed fabric as it hugged her skin tightly, the slick kobold cum sandwich beneath, Love set out back towards the abbey. She was sure Wilhelm would be mightily pleased when she informed him of her success, particularly when she showed him the new tricks she learnt from her prey. The things she'd do with his training tool would leave him breathless. The end.